over time you realize that there are certain situations where you're going to need to make a move. And then there are certain situations where you realize I need to be patient. You got to know when to make that move and pivot. And then sometimes you got to know when to just relax, chill, stay consistent, stay where you're at. Um, I can use myself as an example. When I was working at Q Health in California, my main goal was just to be there consistently and stay there for a while. That was just my initial main goal. And I did that. I started working there in September 2020 and didn't leave until June 2022. But the moment that I knew I needed to pivot and find another job was once I saw work was slowing down and all the temporary workers that they had there that they had working for a little bit, they let them go. And whenever a company lets all their temporary workers go, you kind of know that production is going to slow down and that it's possible that since they're slowing down in production, that that the work might slow down. And if the work slows down, eventually that'll lead you to having no job because they'll have no work for you. So once that started happening, I was like, okay, well, this is probably not going to end well if I stay here. But also, the way I saw it, I was like, well, I met my wife, and we want to be together, so we're planning on moving together. So at this point, the perfect pivot is to find a job in a location that we want to live at. So that's what I did. I started applying, and then lo and behold, I found a job that was near the house that we wanted to live at. So once I did that, I was like, okay, well, let's see if I can get this job and knock it out. And then if I do, I can just switch over. And then at that point, I'll be working at the new place we're living at. And I will have left this job before it's gone bad. And then I ended up finding a job. And I started working there. And, I moved eventually. And then, fast forward 2 or 3 years, that job that I left, they closed. They shut down. They weren't producing anymore. So, when that happened, I realized, I made the right decision. Um, a mistake I can say I made is once I started working at that job, I got an offer for about 80K to work in Maryland. And I wasn't sure about it because I was already, I had a good spot in California. I was a supervisor. I wasn't making like amazing money, but I was making decent money. So, I was in a good position. And while being in that good position, I was like, well, I want us to start our life together and be on our own. So, you know, once that happened, I was like, well, this might be worth a shot. In hindsight, the position I was in was perfect for me. It was overnight, but even though it was overnight, I was a supervisor, I was in charge, I ran the shift like I wanted. Um, it all depended on me to make sure everything was running well, which is when I usually work best, when everything depends on me to do everything. So, you know, um, I was dependent on to train everybody. I was dependent on to make sure everything was running correctly. I was dependent on to make sure that, machines were fixed and up and running like they're supposed to. And I thrive in situations like that. So it was perfect for me. But I was like, this is a higher paying job and it allows us to get started with our life together. So let's try it. And then I did it, and then they ended up letting me go 6 months later. So when I look back at it, I realized that wasn't a time to pivot. It wasn't a time to pivot. That was a time to stay the course. It definitely was. And I should have, but you live and you learn. You go through certain things and you try to become better at playing the game. So, I ate that, and then I started working at Walgreens. And basically, once I started working at Walgreens, I pretty much realized that, you know, um, I had been there for like, was it a year? I had been there for a year. And I was trying to see what would be the best thing. I was always applying for jobs outside of there, but I wasn't getting any hits. I wasn't getting, chances or opportunities. So at that point, I was like, well, I could try to make this work here and do what I can. So I stayed there and try to make Walgreens work. But I knew I needed to make more money. So I saw once I got my degree that I could be an assistant store manager. And I wasn't sure if I was going to leave my store yet. And I wanted to stay at my store. So, I let the store manager know I want to move up. I want to try to do better. So, whatever I need to do, let's do that. I'm pretty sure I told the story already. But anyway, fast forward. They gave it to someone else. So at that point, it was either stay in that shift lead role and not move and just basically stay there. And, that'd be my role at that point. Nothing changing, making the same money. Or pivot, try to find a new store to become an assistant store manager, get promoted, and make more money. Um, and basically, the way I saw it, with her not promoting me to assistant store manager, they're basically relegating me to being a shift lead and not planning to move me up. Like there was no other position available to move up to. That was the one. So her not even hiring, but her promoting the other guy, basically let me know he's one we want to help run the store. So you're going to stay in the position that you're at, and that's where we want you. So you either stay there and you continue making that same money that you've been making and not move up, or you look for a better opportunity and take a chance on yourself. I knew at that point in time, once I got my degree, that the whole goal at that point was to pivot and put myself in a position to be an assistant store manager. And I accepted the fact that it may come with the caveat that I may have to drive further for wherever I gotta go. So that's what I did. I applied for assistant store manager at another store. And then eventually I found a store that I was going to be at. And then I worked that role. And of course, that was the right pivot. It was a good role. I was doing well at my job. It was fine. So then I was at this point where I didn't have to pivot. I could just stay in the role that I was at. The only thing is I wanted to make more money to help pay the bills more easier. So I I continued working that job, but then I was like, I need to find somewhere where the ceiling for the amount of money that I can make is higher. So at that point, that's when I decided to go back into manufacturing. And then, I had two choices: stay there, take the pharmacy exam test, and become a store manager, or I could pivot and get a new role in a new industry and make more money. And what I ended up doing was I was still testing for the pharmacy exam and trying to pass that. But while I was doing that, I was still applying for other roles. And then I ended up getting a role um, for manufacturing while I was still assistant store manager for more money. So then at that point, it was a choice to either pivot and go to this new role or stay at Walgreens. Now, honestly, when I looked at it, it was a no-brainer. I'm still driving a long distance anyway, and I'm making more money in a new industry where the base salary for a manufacturing associate is higher than the salary for a store manager. So to me, it wasn't really a choice. It was like, I need to make this move. The only caveat is it's a new position, it's a new company, so you're starting over from scratch, which makes things a little more sketchy because you're basically starting over and have to rebuild your reputation in a new place. So, you know, I've never been afraid to do that. Never have. So I made that pivot and made that move, and I'm still there today. I'm basically saying you gotta weigh out the pros and the cons and what you're willing to sacrifice and what benefits you in the long run. And look at the company as a whole as well. If the company is strong, if you know they're going to be there, and you know you're getting experience and you're making good money, and you don't need to move, then why move? There's no point. Stay where you're at, make it work, get that experience. But if you feel you got that experience, or you feel there's a situation where you can make more money and take care of your family more better, then maybe it's time to pivot. But you know you got to be smart about it. You don't want to pivot into a situation where you're now, you know, looking at a job where you've been at for a few months and they're about to let you go because work is slowed down. I actually had an idea. The idea was, when you're thinking about getting a new job and switching, that you want to make sure. Well, it's not even that you want to make sure. Like when I switched and pivoted towards that government job, I knew that everything was dependent on the clearance. And I knew that, if you don't get the clearance, then it's going to be in a bad situation. You're not going to have a job and you moved for no reason and you lost money. But the thing is, I was confident I'd get the clearance, but I was unsure about them waiting for it to finish to allow me to, work in those spaces. And instead of following my instincts, I took a chance. In the end, once that happened, I decided from then on, I'm not doing government work anymore. If I gotta wait and depend on getting a clearance just to be able to get a job and have job stability, I'm not gonna leave what I'm doing right now, making consistent money, for a job that I can end up losing in 6 months. I'm just not doing it again. I can still make the same amount of money, it's just that it's gonna be a longer road and harder because it's not government and it's, regular companies. So I'm not afraid of that. So, at that point I decided I'm not doing that anymore. That was a pivot in itself. And pretty much since then, it's been on the up and up. So, look at the situation, look at the companies that you're being involved with, and make an informed decision that's best for you and it's best for your family. I'm Jeuse Kastoan, and this is Unseen Hours.